when I was a little kid, and I used to hang out with my grandfather, who was in his 90s, and I thought, Jesus, who the hell would want to live this long?
Hollywood has produced immortal legends and buried more than a few lives and stories only insiders truly know. Clint Eastwood, the man with the steely gaze and the roles that helped define American cinema, is one of them. For 6 decades at the top, he became the embodiment of masculinity admired worldwide. Yet behind that cold, powerful image lies a personal life tangled in secrets. He once cheated death in the freezing ocean, built a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and owned a real estate portfolio spanning the United States. A masculine icon with 8 children by 6 different women, he was also at the center of one of the most notorious love lawsuits in Hollywood history. At 94, he still makes films, still shows up on set, but also faces losses that nothing can ever replace. The world knows Clint Eastwood as a legend, but his life may be the clearest proof that the heights of fame always walk hand in hand with mysterious depths. Is Clint Eastwood an unyielding legend, or just a man forever haunted by the very things he conquered? In this story, we'll step into both sides to see a Clint Eastwood the public has never truly seen. Early life. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31st, 1930, right as America was sinking deep into the Great Depression. His father, Clinton Eastwood Sr., worked as a steel worker in an industry constantly hit by production cuts. Jobs came and went. Each time the plant shut down or relocated, the family would pack up their belongings and move on. From the San Francisco Bay Area to Sacramento, from coastal towns to inland industrial hubs, Clint grew up on the dusty roads of California. No house stayed long enough to put down roots. No friend stayed long enough to become truly close. That restless rhythm taught the boy 2 things: to stand on his own and never let anyone tie him down. But along with early self-reliance came an emotional distance Clint began building as a child, a cold shell to avoid the pain of leaving things behind. That shell would later become his trademark on screen, yet it was also the quiet cause of many cracks in his personal life. Clint was never the model student. In high school, he was tall, strong, and physically impressive, but he struggled to fit in. Mischief and a quiet defiance earned him repeated warnings, and eventually, he was asked to leave. He dropped out without regret. While his peers went on to study or find steady work, Clint threw himself into manual jobs: gas station attendant, lumberyard worker, beach lifeguard. Each job was a temporary stop. When boredom struck or the spark faded, he left without looking back. This habit, never settling, never letting himself be held, would follow him for life. The turning point came in 1951, while Clint was serving in the Army at Fort Ord. On a military flight, the plane malfunctioned and was forced to make an emergency landing in the frigid Pacific Ocean. He and the pilot swam for hours through towering waves, battling skin-numbing cold, before finally reaching shore. That brush with life and death carved a lasting mark. Live as if tomorrow doesn't exist. Seize every opportunity before it slips away. And Clint lived exactly that way. Loving when he wanted to love, leaving when he wanted to go, starting over without a thought for the consequences. A childhood on the move, a rebellious youth, and a moment staring death in the face fused into a Clint Eastwood born to survive. Always in control of the situation, never allowing anyone to control him. That instinct would lift him into the role of the unyielding man on the silver screen. But when applied to love and family, it would slowly erode that very image, until he was the one to bring it crashing down. Early career. Clint Eastwood didn't enter Hollywood with a roadmap to the top. After leaving the Army in the early 1950s, he was simply looking for a job that would pay the bills, spending time at Los Angeles City College while juggling temporary work. Then, an unexpected moment changed the trajectory of his life. At a swimming pool, a talent scout for Universal Pictures noticed the 6'4" young man with broad shoulders, sharp features, and a reserved smile. A screen test was offered, not because Clint had studied acting, but because his appearance alone made people believe he could make it on the big screen. Hollywood, however, was no paradise. His contract with Universal placed him in the category of contract players, cheaply hired actors used to fill background roles or fleeting characters. Clint made blink-and-you-miss-it appearances in Revenge of the Creature, 1955, Tarantula, 1955, and a string of other B-movies, often without screen credit. Behind the scenes, producers dismissed him as wooden, his voice too deep, his diction poor, and his gaze too intense for playing gentle characters. Universal soon terminated his contract. Clint returned to manual labor, building house frames, hauling freight, teaching swimming, and began to realize that opportunities in this business weren't for those who quit easily. He worked on his voice, learned to control every glance and movement. Instead of trying to become a smooth-talking actor, he turned his quiet demeanor and motionless face into his own language, a form of silent acting audiences would never forget. In 1958, a new break came from television. Clint was cast in a supporting role in the Western series Rawhide. Initially a background presence, his towering frame, piercing gaze, and the way he let silences speak on screen quickly made his character stand out. Over 8 consecutive seasons, Rawhide transformed Clint from a nobody into a familiar face across America. This success didn't just bring fame, it confirmed that the image of the man of few words, many actions, could become a brand. And that brand caught the attention of Italian director Sergio Leone, who was searching for a fresh face for his spaghetti western trilogy. That meeting would open the next chapter, taking Clint from TV star to the path of becoming a cinematic legend. But beneath these strides forward, Clint was already beginning to taste the pressure of maintaining an image, fleeting relationships, and the most dangerous feeling any artist can have. The belief that he had found the formula to win over audiences. It was a formula he would apply not only to his films, but to his personal life as well, with all the consequences that would follow. Career success. The biggest turning point in Clint Eastwood's career came in the mid-1960s, when he met Sergio Leone, the Italian director searching for a fresh face for the spaghetti western series he had in mind. Leone didn't want a talkative or overly dramatic actor. He wanted someone who could convey an entire story through nothing more than a glance and minimal movement. Clint, with his imposing height, chiseled, cold-edged features, and laconic demeanor, had everything Leone was looking for. Their collaboration produced the iconic trilogy A Fistful of Dollars, 1964, For a Few Dollars More, 1965, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. As the man with no name, the poncho-clad, cigar-smoking gunman with a steely gaze, Clint redefined the image of the cowboy on screen. He stripped away the old-fashioned, noble American heroism, replacing it with the pragmatism, coldness, and calculation of a survivor. With only a handful of lines and a restrained performance, Clint turned this character into a global cultural icon, ushering in a new era for the Western genre. The roaring success in Europe, brought him back to Hollywood with a completely different status, not as a promising TV actor, but as an international movie star. Seizing the moment, in the early 1970s, Clint took on the role of Inspector Harry Callahan in Dirty Harry, 1971. This character embodied the rule-breaking hero archetype, tough, decisive, and willing to do what the system wouldn't dare. Dirty Harry was not only a box office hit, but also cemented Clint's image as the embodiment of American masculinity, cold, unyielding, and dangerous. The series ran for 17 years with installments such as Magnum Force, 1973, The Enforcer, 1976, Sudden Impact, 1983, and The Dead Pool, 1988, making Callahan one of the most famous lawmen in cinema history. But Clint refused to be boxed into a single type of role. In that same year, 1971, he made his directorial debut with Play Misty for Me, opening a parallel path, acting and directing. Over the next 2 decades, he built a diverse filmography. High Plains Drifter, 1973, a surreal take on the Western. The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, an epic of revenge and redemption. Pale Rider, 1985, a Western rich in allegory, and especially The Bridges of Madison County, 1995, where he played a romantic lead, completely breaking the stereotype of the tough guy actor. Regardless of genre, one image ran through them all: a lone man against the world, surviving on his own resolve and principles. In 1992, Clint reached his artistic peak with Unforgiven. More than just a Western, the film dismantled the cowboy myth, exposing the bloody cost of violence and the rot beneath the legends. Unforgiven won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Clint, placing him among Hollywood's master filmmakers. In the years that followed, he continued to prove his enduring creativity through weighty, varied projects. Mystic River, 2003, adapted from Dennis Lehane's novel, was a dark tragedy of loss and vengeance. Premiering at the Cannes Film Festival, it was hailed by critics as a brutal yet deeply human work, winning Oscars for Sean Penn and Tim Robbins. A year later, Million Dollar Baby, 2004, landed like a direct punch to the audience's heart. The story of an aging trainer and a young female boxer not only won 4 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Picture for Clint, but also became the clearest testament to his ability to mine the depths of human emotion. Gran Torino, 2008, unexpectedly became a global box office phenomenon, grossing over $270 million on a $33 million budget. Critics called it a beautiful farewell to Clint's leading man roles, as he portrayed a gruff yet warm-hearted veteran, a reflection of his own public persona. He didn't stop at personal stories. American Sniper, 2014, shook America, sparking fierce debates about the Iraq War and patriotism while breaking box office records for a war film. Sully, 2016, was praised for its grounded, unembellished portrayal of the Miracle on the Hudson. Richard Jewell, 2019, served as a sobering warning about the power and danger of the media. And with Juror Number 2, 2024, Clint Eastwood, at 94, was still in the director's chair, orchestrating every frame with the same focus and discipline as ever. Critics called it living proof that he is not just a legend of the past, but still actively writing his own chapter in film history. Yet alongside the fame, power, and immense fortune lies another legacy: a complex private life, overlapping relationships, high-profile lawsuits, and controversial personal choices. Clint Eastwood's conquest of Hollywood gave him absolute power, and that power deeply influenced every decision in his personal life, shaping the darker side of his story. A side Hollywood rarely wants to speak of, but one that remains inseparable from who he is. Margaret Neville Johnson. 3 decades behind a legend. 6 decades of conquering Hollywood turned Clint Eastwood into one of the most powerful names in the film industry. He could choose any script, direct any project, and make the entire system revolve around him. But that absolute power and freedom didn't just shape his career. It seeped into his private life, where relationships were tested and quiet fractures began to form, even in the marriage that seemed the most unshakable. The story between Clint Eastwood and Margaret Neville Johnson didn't begin on a film set or at a glamorous party. It was the early 1950s, when Clint was still an unknown young man, living on manual labor jobs and holding a faint hope for Hollywood. Margaret, from an affluent and educated background, was drawn to Clint's quiet masculinity. He wasn't a star. He wasn't even a proper working actor yet. But there was something about him that made people believe he would accomplish something great. In 1953, they married. No flashbulbs, no headlines, just 2 young people choosing each other when the future was still uncertain. In those early years, as Clint took nameless bit parts, Margaret patiently stood as his anchor. She managed the household, handled the finances, and accepted that her husband would often be away chasing small acting jobs. They had little money, but they seemed to have one thing that could last: trust. For nearly 2 decades, Margaret watched Clint's career rise, from obscurity to Rowdy Yates and Rawhide to a global breakthrough with Sergio Leone. The more successful he became, the more packed his schedule was, and the more distance grew between them. On set, Clint met countless leading ladies, and whispers of other women began to surface. One of those whispers turned out to be true: a 14-year affair with actress Roxanne Tunis, which resulted in the birth of Kimber in 1964. A child out of wedlock the public wouldn't learn about for decades. Margaret stayed silent. At public events, she appeared impeccably composed beside Clint, revealing no hint of strain. Outwardly, their marriage remained intact. But inside, it was an unspoken arrangement. She upheld the image of the legal wife of a Hollywood superstar while he lived as a bachelor in practice. In the 1970s and 1980s, as Clint became a box office fixture with Dirty Harry, his affairs gradually became an open secret. His relationship with Sandra Locke, which began in 1975, ran in parallel with his marriage. It was no longer rumor. It was a reality Margaret could not deny. After more than 30 years, her patience reached its limit. They separated in 1984 and finalized their divorce in 1988. The settlement was said to be worth tens of millions of dollars, one of the most expensive divorces in Hollywood at the time. There were no public attacks in the press, no loud courtroom battles, but the ending was a cold conclusion to a marriage for which Margaret had given her entire youth. What makes this story remarkable is the way the two treated each other afterward. Clint never publicly criticized Margaret, and she never spoke ill of him, even though she held stories that could have caused a scandal. They met when necessary for their children and maintained a baseline of respect, rare in the entertainment industry. For Margaret, Clint was the only man she had ever been with for so long. For Clint, It was the only marriage he sustained for 3 decades, a stretch of time he himself admitted, "I wasn't always the best husband." And in hindsight, his marriage to Margaret was the first wall shielding him from the storms of his personal life, until he was the one who tore it down with his own choices. Roxanne Tunis, 14 years in secret. While his marriage to Margaret Neville Johnson still existed on paper, Clint Eastwood entered into the longest and most secretive relationship of his life. In 1959, while filming Rawhide, he met Roxanne Tunis, a dancer and bit-part actress who quietly appeared on many Hollywood sets. Roxanne wasn't a cover-page star, but she had a strong, athletic beauty and an independent air that caught Clint's attention. They began an extramarital relationship, never loud, yet never entirely hidden from those in the business. On paper, Clint remained Margaret's husband. In reality, Roxanne became the woman he turned to for 14 years. In 1964, they had a daughter, Kimber. Kimber's existence was kept from the public and most of the press, a shared secret that Clint, Roxanne, and Margaret all understood, but never spoke of. For Roxanne, Clint was a mix of romantic man and guarded movie star. They rarely appeared together before cameras, but there were private, everyday moments only close acquaintances ever saw. Short getaways, quiet dinners, and Clint slipping by her house in silence, avoiding any watchful eyes. Roxanne never demanded marriage. She accepted the role of the woman by his side the public never knew about. In the 1970s, when Clint began a public relationship with Sondra Locke, his romance with Roxanne quietly ended. There was no announcement, no fight. They simply stopped walking the same path, though Kimber remained the bond between them. Roxanne chose to raise her daughter outside the chaos of Hollywood, giving Kimber as normal a childhood as possible. For decades, the public knew almost nothing of Roxanne's existence. Only those within the industry understood that she had once played a special role in Clint's life, a role both intimate and concealed. Then, in 2023, at the age of 93, Clint Eastwood unexpectedly broke his silence. In a private conversation later quoted by the press, he said Roxanne was the love of my life. The statement shocked American media, not only because it came more than half a century later, but because it upended long-held assumptions about Clint's romantic life. By then, Roxanne had already passed away, taking with her a story she had never told publicly. Clint's late admission felt like a tribute, but also a kind of regret. In a life crowded with romances both brief and long, Roxanne was the only one he ever publicly called the love of my life. And it happened only when she was no longer there to hear it. If his marriage to Margaret was a long chapter filled with empty spaces, then Roxanne Tunis was the chapter written in silence, with lines that never made it to print. And perhaps that is why, when it was finally revealed, it carried such weight. The weight of a love that neither time, distance, nor wrong choices could erase. Sondra Locke, love, emotional abuse, and a legal battlefield. The meeting between Clint Eastwood and Sondra Locke in 1972 at Universal Studios began like destiny. Both were at pivotal points in their careers. Clint was one of the most powerful stars in Hollywood after the success of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, while Sondra had just earned an Oscar nomination for her debut role in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. They quickly discovered they had much in common. A shared skepticism of traditional marriage and both bound by in-name-only unions, Clint with Margaret Johnson, Sondra with her gay best friend, Gordon Anderson. Clint didn't court her in the usual way. He planted in Sandra the belief that she was the only one who could change him. He even wrote her a song, "She Made Me Monogamous," as an unspoken vow that she would be the one to end his endless romantic wanderings. That belief led Sandra to drop all her defenses and step into Clint's orbit, one she never fully understood until she was inside it. In 1975, while co-starring in the outlawed Josie Wales, they turned that initial attraction into a public romance. Clint moved Sandra in, first to a house in Sherman Oaks, then to a Bel Air estate they spent 3 years renovating. It seemed like a new home, but its foundation was shaky. Clint didn't want to marry, didn't want children, and refused to accept her legal bond to Gordon Anderson. Twice Sandra became pregnant, and both times Clint persuaded her to have an abortion. The second time, he asked her to be sterilized. Ironically, while living with Sandra, Clint secretly fathered 2 children with flight attendant Jocelyn Reeves, a fact Sandra only learned later. It was a devastating blow to her trust, yet she clung to the relationship, believing love and their shared history would carry them through. Outwardly, they were a Hollywood power couple, appearing together in films like Every Which Way But Loose, 1978, and Sudden Impact, 1983. Behind the scenes, the relationship was slowly becoming a chain of simmering conflicts and subtle control. From there, love turned into a battlefield. In April 1989, while Sandra was at work, Clint had the locks changed on their home and all her belongings moved into storage. She claimed she wasn't even allowed to collect her clothes or her pet parrot. No explanation, no chance to negotiate. In response, Sandra sued Clint for palimony, financial compensation for their 14 years of living together as husband and wife, along with claims of trespass, property deprivation, emotional distress, and interference with her career. The lawsuit quickly became tabloid fodder. Court filings revealed shocking allegations. Clint had sabotaged her directing projects, Rat Boy, Impulse, manipulated Warner Brothers to shut her out of opportunities, and used his influence to make Hollywood forget her. By late 1990, the case was settled. Clint agreed to a 3-year development deal worth $1.5 million at Warner Brothers, plus a house and cash. On paper, it was a chance for Sandra to direct films and continue her career. In reality, it was the opening act for a much bigger play. Over 3 years at Warner Brothers, Sandra submitted more than 30 projects. None were approved. She realized it wasn't because the scripts were bad, but because the development deal was a facade. Her lawyers discovered that the money Warner paid her actually came from Clint, funneled through the budget of Unforgiven, 1992. In other words, the Warner deal was a device to buy her silence while ensuring she would never make a film. In June 1995, Sandra sued Clint again, this time for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, and also sued Warner Brothers for colluding to destroy her career. Financial records, testimony from Warner staff, and accounting documents became central evidence. Clint was called to the stand and admitted to secretly funding the Warner deal, but claimed it was an act of goodwill to help her. The September 1996 trial was so intense that the press likened it to a Hollywood movie with a ready-made script. One juror revealed that the panel had already leaned 10-2 in Sandra's favor and was only discussing damages when the two sides suddenly reached a secret settlement. The amount was never disclosed, but Sandra told the press, "This is a big message to Hollywood. Power doesn't give anyone the right to bury someone in silence." Sandra won both lawsuits, but lost her career. She became a pariah no one in Hollywood wanted to work with, and her health declined due to breast and bone cancer. In 1997, she published her memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, recounting the entire saga from love to legal warfare, a story told with both affection and bitterness. In 2018, Sandra died at the age of 74. News of her death was kept private for 6 weeks, with no public tribute from Clint. The Clint-Locke romance began with powerful attraction and creative partnership, but ended in 2 courtroom battles, leaving an unhealable scar on both their lives, and on the image of Clint Eastwood as the unyielding man. The Maze of Love. When the heart doesn't know how to stop. The 2 lawsuits with Sandra Locke came to an end, but they didn't slow Clint Eastwood down, neither in his career nor certainly in his love life. In fact, even while still living with Locke, he had begun a secret relationship with Jocelyn Reeves, a young flight attendant. The affair was kept so quiet that for years, no one outside of those closest to him knew it existed. The result was 2 children, Scott, 1986, and Catherine, 1988, born while Clint was still living as though married to Locke. For Locke, it was a double betrayal. Not only infidelity, but a deception carefully hidden for a long time. When his relationship with Locke ended in the late 1980s, Clint entered a new romantic chapter, this time with actress Frances Fisher. Their romance didn't last long, but it was deep enough to bring him a daughter, Francesca, born in 1993. Raised in an artistic environment, Francesca became an actress and television personality, often appearing alongside her father at events, serving as a reminder that even when his relationships ended, Clint maintained a certain level of connection with his children. In 1996, Clint did something many thought he would never do again. He remarried. Dina Ruiz, a television news anchor 35 years his junior, became the second woman to enter into a legal marriage with the legendary actor. They met when Dina interviewed Clint for a television program, and that conversation quickly led to a serious relationship. Less than a year later, they married in Las Vegas, a decision that surprised all of Hollywood. That same year, Dina gave birth to their daughter Morgan, and for nearly 2 decades, she was the most publicly visible woman by Clint's side. They attended award ceremonies, film premieres, and Dina even became the central figure in the reality TV show Mrs. Eastwood and Company, 2012, where she appeared alongside Morgan and one of Clint's other daughters. However, differences in personality gradually eroded the marriage. Dina was outgoing and comfortable sharing family life with the public, while Clint was reserved and always kept the media at arm's length. Dina's participation in reality TV was reportedly one of the factors that irritated him, and rumors of trouble began in 2013 when both were spotted out with other people. A year later, they officially divorced, ending 18 years together. After this divorce, Clint seemed uninterested in marriage, but he still sought companionship. In 2014, he met Christina Sandera, the restaurant manager at Mission Ranch, the resort Clint owns in Carmel. Without fanfare or publicity, their relationship unfolded quietly but steadily. Christina soon became a familiar face at Clint's side during film premieres, award shows, and private industry gatherings. To Clint's friends and family, Christina brought him peace, a rare thing in his tumultuous, romantic life. For nearly a decade, she has been his partner, sharing simple moments in Carmel, private trips, and the occasional public appearance. Clint's successive romances and marriages, from Jocelyn Reeves and Frances Fisher to Dina Ruiz, all left a distinct mark on his life, not only because of the children they brought, but because they reflected one consistent trait. Clint Eastwood always pursued emotional connection, yet found it difficult to sustain for long. His relationships often overlapped, intertwined, and at times ran concurrently, making him both the image of a charming man and a central figure in debates over fidelity. To the public, this has become an inseparable part of his legacy, a silver screen legend, but also a master philanderer, living by his own rules, even when it meant breaking the ones he had set for himself. The real estate empire, power beyond the screen. Clint Eastwood has not only dominated Hollywood with his iconic roles and directorial mastery, he has quietly built a real estate empire stretching from California to Hawaii and Idaho. Every property he owns is more than just a place to live. Each bears his personal imprint, reflecting both refined taste and the life philosophy of a man who constantly seeks balance between power and peace. In Carmel by the Sea, where he has spent decades, Clint owns a compound worth around $20 million, spanning nearly 16,000 square feet, designed in a Spanish style infused with the natural charm of the coast. It's a sanctuary where he retreats from the noise, living in privacy with sweeping views of the picturesque shoreline, a dream he had cherished since his days as a young soldier. Also in Carmel, Clint saved Mission Ranch from demolition in the 1980s, paying $5 million for the 22-acre property. Instead of turning it into a commercial development, he restored it piece by piece, from roof tiles and chimneys to the interior, transforming it into a unique resort with 31 rooms, a restaurant, and green pastures where sheep graze under the sunset. To him, Mission Ranch is a cultural legacy of Carmel, a testament that preserving history is just as important as building anew. Not far from there, Clint created another modern marvel, the Tehama Golf Club. Spanning over 2,000 acres in the Monterey Peninsula, it's a blend of raw nature and top-tier luxury. The 18-hole course was designed to maximize views of the Santa Lucia Mountains in Monterey Bay, while the 18,000-square-foot clubhouse, styled in Spanish architecture, features interiors crafted by Clint's longtime film collaborators. Limited to just 300 members, Tehama embodies his philosophy, enjoying life in harmony with both nature and art. In Los Angeles, Clint owns a Spanish-style Bel Air villa of over 6,000 square feet, distinguished by thick brick walls, red tile roofs, and intricate carvings. In Northern California, he owns Rising River Ranch in Castle, a sprawling 1,100-acre estate where he can immerse himself in pristine nature, far removed from Hollywood's buzz. Idaho is Clint's escape from mountain solitude. His nearly 6,000-square-foot Sun Valley estate, built in a modern craftsman style, offers breathtaking views of rugged peaks. The interiors are warm yet luxurious, complete with a man-made pond and a party barn for private gatherings. Not bound to land alone, Clint also owns an oceanfront estate in Hawaii, set on over an acre right by the shore, which was featured in the reality series Mrs. Eastwood and Company in 2012. Here, he enjoys tranquil days beside the deep blue ocean, far removed from the rhythm of Hollywood life. From restoring Mission Ranch to preserve history, to creating Tehama Golf Club as a private paradise, to owning lavish residences from California to Hawaii, Clint Eastwood has made real estate an inseparable part of his legacy. If the silver screen brought him fame, these properties are how he stamped his name beyond the spotlight, leaving behind lasting value that will endure far beyond his film career, legacy, and influence. Clint Eastwood leaves behind not only dozens of iconic roles and Oscar-winning films, but also a profound imprint on how Hollywood perceives masculinity on screen. From the man with no name, cold and pragmatic, to Harry Callahan, tough and defiant, Eastwood created a template for the American male archetype that is both emblematic and controversial. His influence is so pervasive that generations of actors and directors, from Kevin Costner to Quentin Tarantino, have openly acknowledged being shaped by his style. As a director, Clint proved something rare in Hollywood, that an A-list star can transform into a master filmmaker without losing his identity. Unforgiven, Million Dollar Baby, Mystic River, and Gran Torino were not only commercial successes, but also became study material for film students, illustrating how to tell stories through imagery and pacing. His filmmaking style, restrained, pragmatic, and character-driven, has stood as a counterpoint to the spectacle and special effects of the modern era. Beyond the screen, Eastwood has left his mark in sustainable real estate development and historic preservation, particularly in Carmel and Monterey. Mission Ranch, Tahama Golf Club, and his restoration of local architectural heritage show that he has used his wealth not just to build more, but to preserve what is worth keeping. However, Clint's legacy is not without shadows. His complex personal life, overlapping relationships, high-profile lawsuits, and accusations of abusing power have cast doubt on the unyielding man image he built. To some, he is proof that talent and success are not immune to moral failings. It is this coexistence of two sides, glory and controversy, artistry and personal flaws, that makes Clint Eastwood one of the most complex figures Hollywood has ever produced. He stands as an inspiration for those who believe persistence can outlast time, and also as a cautionary tale that absolute power always comes with a cost. Whether you see him as an unyielding legend or a man haunted by the very things he conquered, there's no denying that Clint Eastwood has left an indelible mark on the silver screen, in the film industry, and in the memories of millions around the world. Current life. At 94, Clint Eastwood remains one of the few Hollywood legends still active on set. His 2024 directorial project, Juror Number 2, is seen as proof of his extraordinary work ethic, especially when most of his peers retired long ago. He still attends production meetings, oversees every frame, and maintains the same fast, disciplined filmmaking style he's upheld for decades. Yet Clint's life today is far quieter. He rarely appears at social events unless absolutely necessary. There have been no more public images of him hand in hand with a partner since the sudden passing of Christina Sandera, his companion for nearly a decade, from a heart attack in early 2024. This loss, following the death of Roxanne Tunis just a year earlier, has left a visible emptiness in his life. Close friends describe Clint in recent months as quieter than ever, spending most of his time in Carmel, walking along the coast, or sitting for hours at Mission Ranch, watching the sunset fall over the pastures. Although his health is said to remain stable, Clint has chosen to slow down. He keeps a routine of light morning exercise, eats simply, and reads extensively about history, a passion he rarely speaks about publicly. His family stays in regular contact, but his children respect his privacy, rarely sharing anything about their father with the media. To the public, Clint Eastwood now stands as a symbol of endurance, a man who has spent nearly 7 decades in the business, from an unknown to a legend, from dazzling glory to exposed shadows. But to him, this may be a period of reflection, looking back at everything gained, lost, and the questions still unanswered. Perhaps as in his best films, Clint is letting the final chapter of his life story close quietly, without explanation, leaving the audience to decide for themselves who he truly is. Clint Eastwood has never lived to please others. He's walked through 6 decades of Hollywood without bowing to trends, without changing to suit the crowd. The steely gaze, the restrained storytelling, and even the controversial personal choices, all have been his own decisions. Now, with cameras no longer following his every move, he still holds on to that same right. The right to decide who he will be and how his story will end. No retirement announcements, no emotional posts on social media, no explanations or justifications. Just a man sitting before the Carmel Sea, silently watching the waves, as if the world doesn't need to understand him any further. In an era where fame is measured by constant visibility, Clint Eastwood chooses distance. Is this the quiet retreat of a legend, or the silent victory of a man who kept his autonomy until the very end? What do you think? What truly makes a life worth remembering? The golden statues, the unforgettable roles, or the ability to live true to yourself in a world eager to define you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if there's a line of dialogue, a glance, or a scene from Clint that has stayed with you, leave it here. Not to judge, but to hold on to something from a man who spent his life telling stories that made us believe, fear, or feel deeply. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories about the legends you love, because every great life deserves to be told to its very last moment.